Ancient Egypt Timeline. Ancient Egypt was one of the oldest and longest-lasting world civilizations. It was located along the Nile River in the northeast part of Africa and lasted for over 3,000 years. Historians generally use two ways to outline the history of ancient Egypt. 1. Dynasties. The first is by using the different dynasties that ruled Egypt. These are the families that had power and passed the leadership of Pharaoh down from one family member to another. Counting the Ptolemaic dynasty set up by the Greeks, there were over 30 dynasties that ruled ancient Egypt. This sounds like a lot at first, but remember, this was over the course of 3,000 years. 2. Kingdoms and periods. There are also three primary kingdoms that historians use to define periods of ancient Egypt. After each kingdom, there is an intermediate period. The three kingdoms were the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. Here is a brief outline of the timeline of the ancient Egypt civilization, showing the kingdoms, periods, and dynasties. Early Dynastic Period, 2950 to 2575 BC. Dynasties 1 through 3. The ancient Egyptian civilization begins. The first pharaoh of Egypt, Menes, united the upper and lower parts of Egypt into a single civilization. He put the capital at the midpoint of the two lands in a city called Memphis. During this time, the Egyptians developed hieroglyphic writing, which would be important for making records and running the government. Near the end of the dynastic period was the start of the Old Kingdom. The first pyramid is built by the pharaoh Djoser and the famous Egyptian architect Imhotep. Old Kingdom, 2575 to 2150 BC. Dynasties 4 through 8. The fourth dynasty begins and the Great Pyramids of Giza and the Sphinx are built. This is often called the Age of the Pyramids. The fourth dynasty is a time of peace and also a time when the sun god Re became prominent in Egyptian religion. The Old Kingdom nears its end as the seventh and eighth dynasties are weak and the government begins to collapse. The end of the Old Kingdom is a time of poverty and famine. First Intermediate Period, 2150 to 1975 BC, Dynasties 9 through 11. Egypt splits back into two countries. The Old Kingdom ends and the First Intermediate Period begins. Middle Kingdom, 1975 to 1640 BC, Dynasties 11 through 14. The pharaoh Mentuhotep II reunites the two parts of Egypt under one rule, signaling the start of the Middle Kingdom. The royal tombs are moved to the north near the city of Memphis. The Egyptians start to use irrigation to carry water from the Nile to their crops. Second Intermediate Period, 1640 to 1520 BC. Dynasties 15 through 17. The Middle Kingdom ends and the Second Intermediate Period begins. Some of the dynasties at the end of the Middle Kingdom and during this period only last for a short time. The horse and chariot are introduced during this period. New Kingdom, 1520 to 1025 BC, Dynasties 18 to 20. The New Kingdom is the time of greatest prosperity for the ancient Egyptian civilization. During this time, the pharaohs conquer the most lands, and the Egyptian empire reaches its peak. 1520 BC, Ambrose I reunites the kingdom and the New Kingdom begins. 1506 BC, Thutmose I becomes pharaoh. He is the first to be buried in the Valley of the Kings. For the next 500 years, this will be the main burial area for the royalty of Egypt. 1479 BC, Hatchiput becomes pharaoh. She is one of the most successful women pharaohs and rules for 22 years. 1386 BC. Amenhotep III becomes pharaoh. Under his reign, the Egyptian civilization would reach its peak in prosperity, power, and art. He builds the Temple of Luxor. 1352 BC. Akhenaten changed the Egyptian religion to worship a single god. This was a major change of life. It only lasted for his rule, however, as his son Tutankhamun would change the religion back to the old ways. 1279 BC. Ramses II becomes pharaoh. He would rule for 67 years and build many monuments. Third Intermediate Period, 1075 to 633 BC. Dynasties 21 through 24. The new kingdom comes to an end when Egypt becomes divided. Third Intermediate Period begins. Egypt grows weaker and is eventually conquered by the Assyrian Empire near the end of this period. Late Period, 653 to 332 BC. Dynasties 25 to 30. The Late Period begins as the Assyrians leave Egypt and the locals regain control from the vassals left by the Assyrians. 525 BC. The Persians conquer Egypt and rule for over 100 years. 332 BC. Alexander the Great and the Greeks conquer Egypt. He founds the great city of Alexandria. Ptolemaic Dynasty. 305 BC. Ptolemy I becomes pharaoh, and the Ptolemaic period begins. Alexandria becomes the new capital. 30 BC. The last pharaoh, Cleopatra VII, dies.